welcome you back to our podcast, Your Mental Health Matters. So this is podcast number 5. My goodness, I can't believe we're already at this point already. We've done a few already, and now we're getting into some deeper topics. This one in particular we have a guest speaker this time, which is wonderful. We're very happy to have Wendy Soul back with us. Wendy is a parent, a teacher, and a counselor, right? And you are raising a child with a mental health diagnosis. So that's what this podcast is for, to have a little bit more of an insight into what may be a parent's perspective. But because you wear the different hats, this is going to be a beautiful way to be able to get us to have a conversation that sees it from all lenses, from the teacher's lens, those teachers that may be watching this, or parent lens, or even an individual may be suffering themselves with mental illness. Specifically, we are talking about borderline personality disorder, but as we all know in our work, that's not just a standalone entity. There's a lot more going on with the individual. I do want to give a trigger warning that some of the things that will be discussed today can be maybe triggering to those of you who may have been impacted personally or directly, indirectly. Please seek help if you need it, and that could be going to some other solutions, calling the crisis line or the walk-in clinic. Please do not feel like you're in this alone. It was really important that we said that piece because some of the topics may be vulnerable for some of us. So digging in, borderline personality disorder is complex. It is a pervasive disorder about relationships, right? It's that uneasiness in those relationships. Oftentimes there's feelings of abandonment from the person who is been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, oftentimes in early adulthood, but it can manifest much earlier, and we may be seeing some of those things and not know exactly what it is and how to move forward with it. Some of the things we may see is some impulsivity in them. I really thought this was an interesting one. Extremes between idealization and devaluation. I really see that, especially with the topic with borderline, and especially with what we're going to be talking about with your daughter who has borderline personality disorder. So some of the things that come up is that self-harming behavior, some of that suicidal ideation that happens with somebody who is suffering from this mental illness. And the instability of relationships keeps coming back in my head. Like, that's a piece that I find we're always pivoting. Just when we think we have it figured out, something else comes up and we are thrown off and have to reassess to help support the person all over again. So Wendy, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to just draw attention to Joni, who's here from the Catholic Board, and of course Joel, our psychologist. Our district comes in for both districts and does assessments. Welcome everyone. Let's get into some of the conversation. Okay?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I think the first question is from you, Joni.
Just kind of starting off with some signs and symptoms that you've noticed in your daughter, like when you kind of like knew, okay, something's not right.
Yeah, it's interesting as Melanie was reading sort of the diagnosis characteristics. It's like I feel like my journey with mental health began with Naomi the day she, sprung from my body, but I didn't know it at the time. It's one of those, like, it took me 13 years sitting in the atrium of the Stollery. Actually, we were waiting to see a child psychiatrist for the very first time, and it was like I had this light bulb moment sitting in that atrium going, oh, okay, yeah. It was like 13 years led me to this point of like, oh, that terrible twos was more than just the terrible twos. Right. Oh, that 4-year-old doing this was more than that. Oh, and it was like sitting there beside her waiting to see the doctor. I went, I don't think I could have parented my way out of this. Like, this is bigger than parenting. Definitely noticed. And she was our first, too, so I didn't have anything to compare it to until our second came along, and it was like, oh, wow, like, not everything is a fight, or not every, like, I can remember as an infant even, she would cry in her car seat, like an intensity, like, beyond just crying, like wailing if the sun got on her eyes. And then as she got older, like, certain clothes, like, the intensity of, like, distress was very noticeable, and, like, any routine changes, those kinds of things, like, very noticeable. But because she was my first, I just thought it was
Well, you know, Wendy, I'm sorry. I just want to clarify though for a second because a lot of things you're saying could be typical as well. So even though she's your first,
Yeah.
I even as a counselor or therapist, we would not know this, right? We would be trying, oh, okay, this is just somebody who's just struggling, had lack of sleep, or maybe there's some sensory things, and you wouldn't necessarily know it until you know it, right?
Yes. And
So,
yeah,
Go ahead.
and so yeah, like, and meanwhile, going along in my parenting journey, you know, reading the books,
Yeah.
doing the things, you know,
Yes.
being a teacher. Oh yes, I know kids.
Right.
I can
Right.
I can raise kids, you know. So, but yeah, the characteristics that you're asking about, Joni, like definitely the intense emotions, like even as a little child, like, you know, preschool to, you know, school age, extreme joy and then extreme sorrow and like hard to comfort and soothe and those kind of things. But again, still just thinking, oh, this is just who she is.
Right.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
this is just kids.
Mhm.
But also being aware, you know, friends of mine having children the same age, oh, like that kid just left the spray park.
Right.
My kid had an epic meltdown. Like,
Right.
this is different.
Mhm.
So,
The reactions are longer and
yeah.
more intense. Yeah.
So that was when she was, so like I say, sitting in that Stollery atrium, that was when she was 13 and the wheels were really falling off around us in terms of her wellness. It was like a moment of clarity of like, this is 13 years in the making. This is not out of nowhere.
That's a really
And-
big point, Wendy.
yeah.
Yeah, and also the fact, knowing your story and being involved in your life, professionally walking with you, beside you, you as a parent, me as a professional working in counseling, a lot of times people assume that this particular thing, borderline personality, isn't diagnosed to 18. And you just said 13 years old. So I think that's really important that
Yeah.
you hone in on that piece. This wasn't something that just sprung up at 18 and then the diagnosis. She actually had the diagnosis way earlier than the typical person.
Quite young, yeah, and that was made note to us that it
Yeah.
was quite unusual,
Yeah.
but it was just like all the checklists.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, like certainly as she got older, like you were talking about like the relationship struggles, everything was just so dramatic.
Did
Everything
you
was-
see those relationship struggles too when she was a bit younger, or really came out in like junior high school?
No, like I remember in kindergarten, I have a
Okay.
clear memory of it was one of the teacher assistants came to me and said, you know, Naomi's such a nice little girl,
Mhm.
but boy, like she really can't make friends.
Right.
She
Yeah.
really can't make friends.
Just her reaction.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that reactivity and like just like things where I would think, oh, why are you being so difficult on this?
Right.
Of course, now having the lens of my own training with
Yes.
my program and being a counselor myself now, and all the learning we did once she got diagnosed, I know her reactivity is part of the diagnosis,
Mhm.
but
Right.
without that lens, as a parent, a lot of times I would think, oh, like you're so unkind. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not raising you to be
Yeah.
a jerk,
Yeah.
but you're
Yeah.
being a jerk in these
Mhm.
relationships. Why do you hone on to that, or why are you making that a big deal, or, you know?
Then you start questioning your parenting because
Yeah.
Wendy, you're finishing your program. You were not a trained counselor when you were going through this in the early years. You were walking alongside your children as a parent.
Yeah.
And so even if we talk about we may have the book smarts, but we may not be clueless. We may be more clueless as parents.
Mhm.
Figuring it out as a parent is really difficult. You were walking along as a parent, but you kept learning more and more, but you had to figure out her journey specifically because it was specific to her, right? Because what she may be presenting with may be very different than another individual
Mhm.
diagnosed with borderline or another one like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder.
So true and so important, for any parent listening, every child's different.
Yeah.
And, and a parent journeying through that mental health journey, it's like, well, these books aren't working, or talking to this counselor's not working, or what's going on here, medication isn't working. I think that's where understanding and recognizing the complexities of each child and the journey, And sometimes we don't know all the answers. Even us as psychologists or counselors, we might not know all the answers too, but being willing to journey together is so important. Because I think, as you shared, even from a young age, seeing those kind of more OCD type symptoms, the rigidity, all these different pieces. So you might find, for a student or a child with BPD, again, there's these different umbrellas. You think they're presenting with symptoms of rigidity or OCD. You see some of that. Maybe you see some attention concerns or hyperactivity or different things, or depressive concerns. So even for us as professionals, sometimes in working with younger children, those symptoms emerging over time are hard to know and hard to kind of put the pieces together as to what's happening.
It's a puzzle.
Did you find sometimes you just felt like clueless or like, what is going on, or why can't I?
It's funny you say that, Joel, because I remember saying to Melanie, and I continue to say this, is like sometimes because she was diagnosed young for borderline traits, I would say, like, how much of this is her borderline personality disorder, and how much of this is just normal adolescence?
Right, great question.
So, that too is something for parents that they have to kind of flesh out and figure out along the way. Yeah. It adds to the complexity.
It does.
Yeah.
It does, because borderline does not just mean this square little box,
No.
right? It is so complex, and figuring out those pieces. I remember having those conversations with you when you were trying to figure out, is this the OCD manifesting? Is this something else that's happening that's causing her to feel this way? Would this medication help for stabilization in this? And what does that mean? What is going to start bubbling under the surface over here if they stabilize this? It was constantly a concern for you that you had to deal with for you and your family.
So many factors you're going to look into, like, could this behavior be resulting of, like, is it typical, or is it medication, or is it part of the diagnosis?
Yes. Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it has been.
So on that side of things too, as children get older, supporting any child with a mental health diagnosis can be challenging. I think, but for teenagers, there kind of becomes a whole other dynamic where teens, they want to be independent, they want to be able to manage themselves and their life, but then they might not have the prefrontal cortex brain development or just the skills and skill set and supports to be able to do that. So I imagine that particular time was challenging going into those teenage years then, or did you find childhood quite challenging?
It's all been challenging. I think too, like the going into the teenage years, like I said, with Melanie, I would sort of think, like, is this just teenage or is this the borderline? There was always that, and then there was also, like, I guess maybe a grief piece for me is like, as she was emerging into her teen years and I envisioned her, for lack of a better word, blossoming and like more and more independence, I actually saw a shutting down, a less and less capacity within her versus her kind of expanding. I saw her contract and like grow almost more dependent on my husband and I. And then, like, one thing that I had to sort of relearn is handing back capacity to her.
So true.
Because, like, when she was really sick and really unsafe and, like, it was just so scary all the time, I found that I became a parent. I never wanted to be. I was hovering. I was, for honest to goodness safety concerns. But then it was like, when the OCD was so bad, like, she wouldn't do her laundry, for example. And so here's this very capable, in a normal situation, teen, but she had, like, all kinds of rituals around washing clothes, so I would do her laundry, resentfully, but I, it was that feeling of, like, helplessness. So, yeah, like, for me, it was this grief piece of, like, instead of seeing this teenager grow more and more capable and more independent, it was like she kind of shrunk into herself, if that makes sense.
That makes complete sense.
It's so important to processing a parental grief. For various stages or various children with various mental health diagnoses, it is very important to acknowledge that and be able to process it. Did you find you had a sounding board for that, or at the time you were aware of it, or did you find looking back in hindsight?
Yeah, and that's something I would say to parents is, like, you gotta acknowledge the grief, and you have to grieve the child you thought you were going to have
Yeah.
Right.
and that you envisioned, and then work toward, and go through the stages of grief, like you say, and then accept what is with a lot of work,
Yeah.
and then you're able to better be with that child for who they are. But letting go of and grieving what you pictured your parenting journey would be,
So
or the
important.
child would be, is such a process. And I can remember, for me, you said it was grief even awareness. Naomi was in Casa House in Sherwood Park, so an inpatient program, and just the timing of her 4 months there, she started August, so then she was about a month into it, and school started. And my other daughter was starting grade 2, and got her out the door to school, and I got home and I bawled my eyes out. And
Right.
I remember a friend dropping a book off and a bar of chocolate and a note that said, you might need this today, and it was so timely. But I went to I was seeing a counselor at that time, and I remember it was the first time I said to her, I don't know why I was crying, it's the first day of school, and Naomi's far away, but it's not like she's dead or anything. I'm not a grieving mother, and she stopped me, and it was the first time she said, whoa, yes, you are a grieving mother, and you're grieving that this isn't the grade 9 start you would envision for your child. And so that was the beginning for me of realizing, oh yeah, I am grieving.
I think it's so important for all of us as parents, as well, grieving how we want things to be for our kids, and especially when they're going through hard times or mental health difficulties, showing up for what is, instead of continuing to fight the upstream battle of trying to find what should be or could be or how it looks, neurotypically for other children or other families. But really, that grief is so important to showing up and really being on the journey of how things are today.
The acceptance piece, I thought it's saying that letting go of what you were hoping for and then accepting what is. It's also this feeling of I think another part of the grieving process for me, and maybe the acceptance, was I want to say the first couple of years of her really getting ill and then receiving the diagnosis. It was very much focused on fixing this. She's a problem to fix. This is a problem to fix. And then moving to, this is a situation to experience. And that shift from I need to fix this. This is a problem, to this is an experience I'm going through, was also a part of that shift to acceptance.
That's a really big piece of it, and looking at your relationship with your daughter and accepting where she's at was so important. But let's pivot for a second about those relationships, because it wasn't just her relationship with you, it was you with her, and how you saw your eldest growing up that you thought, but how it also interacted with her sister and you two as parents and her friends. Relationship-wise, you mentioned earlier that you kind of felt you just didn't know, is this typical adolescence, or is this, is this the borderline personality disorder? And with that, what that may look like. And some of that was suicidal ideation we haven't talked about yet, but I think it's important we say the words.
Yeah.
There was suicidal ideation that happened often. There were attempts.
There was a lot of volatility, and remains to this day a lot of volatility in relationships. Yeah, very volatile.
And how that impacted you and your family is a big piece of that. And how you chose to respond to it would be directly impacted by what she brought forward as well. So you were constantly in a state of seeing what mode she was in and having to compensate. I remember a moment where you came in and talked to me about something that she recently did, and it was an attempt. And you were completely numb. And you were detached. And I remember asking you, this is your daily life. This is for self-preservation. You have to have that armor on. And you went, because that was your norm, whereas for us, it wouldn't be. And that's just something that's really impactful. I need you as a parent to hear from someone who listened to your story, seeing that you had to put on this armor just to get through your everyday life. it resonated with me because you did that for self-preservation, and you had to keep living your life and thriving for your family and for your other daughter as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult when you're dealing with someone who has a mental illness who is so vulnerable themselves.
Yeah, it's so true what you say about like kind of having to carry on with normal life
Yes.
and amongst just these surreal experiences of like volatility, danger. I mean, suicide attempts. Like, I remember us getting ready. We were trying to leave for California
Right.
for Christmas down in Palm Springs with my in-laws, and Naomi was very unstable. But it was like, well, the Disney tickets are booked. Darn it! Like,
Let's go.
Yeah.
you know, and on the phone the day before we were flying, and Naomi had self-harmed at school again, and okay, I'm coming to get her, but we're supposed to leave. Our plane leaves the next day, and on the phone to her mental health therapist through Alberta Health Services, should we be taking her? Should we cancel the whole trip? And the younger sister in her room praying, please let me get to Disneyland.
Right.
And we did ultimately go, and we made it through that trip, and Naomi stayed safe. But navigating these very scary situations in amongst, okay, I gotta get groceries or
Right.
ordinary things.
Exactly.
Ordinary things, yeah.
So your norm in your relationships, including how your youngest daughter responded to Naomi and what was happening, there was just so many times you had to pivot. It wasn't a stable path for any of you involved.
Well, and thinking about the ups and downs of borderline, the highs and lows as being one of the characteristics.
Yes.
That's that pivoting thing.
Yes.
Is meeting Naomi. Often it would be okay, for example, and this is where I think my nervous system kind of remains in a heightened state, is calls from the school.
Yeah.
She's self-harmed. You need to come get her. Come get you.
You just see that phone number and you're like,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Immediately.
yeah. What now?
Yeah.
Yeah, but to have a child go from well, I remember this one day. Is it okay if I share the specific?
Please, I was just about to ask.
She at school had rummaged through. My husband is a first responder and a firefighter paramedic, and he had his kit basically at home, and she had rummaged through it, taken IV supplies to school,
Right.
and basically tried to give herself an IV of salt or something
Some kind of
that she
solution.
figured would be harmful.
right.
But anyway, meanwhile, she's at school with a home done IV. Get that call. Oh my goodness, take her home. And then it was, can I have an egg salad sandwich?
And when you brought her home, so
Right?
so she wanted to just go into your typical family life after
Yeah.
this upheaval at school, where we were all worried about her and you were worried about her, and you were assessing, is she truly suicidal? Is this what is happening for her? What is she trying to communicate? But she sits down and says, can I have an egg sandwich?
Yeah.
How did you respond? Actually, I'm curious. What did you say?
I said, let's work on making an egg salad sandwich.
Good answer.
Yes.
And I
And
think
we did.
that's definitely one of the challenges with more personality disorders or complexities in mental health such as that.
Yeah.
It's you have a teenager that you really want to support,
Yeah.
and how do you support them and maintain that relationship
Ugh.
while trying to have some boundaries and things like that, because often their perceptions, the way they're perceiving your help, might be different.
Yeah.
How did you experience that?
Oh, the perception piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah.
Because we know that the perception is skewed with borderline.
And sometimes with any teenager too, there's a
Well,
whole other
yes.
teenager layer on top of that.
Yes.
Oh, my parents trying to help me, I don't
Yes.
want their help, that
Yes.
piece too.
Or my parent won't help me.
Right.
And they should help me. I get
Right.
that a lot.
Or yeah, it's they think
Yeah.
you're working against me, where you're trying to work with the person, but they think it's
Yes.
the opposite.
How dare you make me make my own sandwich?
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
So there's that learned helplessness piece as well of
Mhm.
that you felt that maybe you didn't know how much this was learned helplessness, how much of this was, am I pushing the boundaries, what is happening? So you were constantly having to figure out what it was that she was bringing forward and how would you respond to it,
Right.
right? That must have been very challenging.
And then on hyper alert to keep her safe.
Exactly.
You had that
Yeah.
risk.
I know. one thing I remember writing about is the 17-year-old toddler. Like, you know, it's like the keeping her safe. Like, I can remember thinking, and I still do struggle with this a bit, the hypervigilance piece of like, just like when it gets too quiet and it's a 2-year-old,
Yes.
you know to go looking for them because they're probably into like the diaper cream and it's everywhere
Yes.
or
And they're
right?
That's where he is right now.
oh, you know this stage. Okay, well imagine that lasting and lasting and lasting. Except it's
17
not
years.
diaper
more
cream.
intense, yeah.
Yeah.
It's dangerous acts of
Yeah.
self-harm. So I can remember feeling like, oh, it's gotten too quiet now. Like,
Mhm.
where is she? What's she doing?
Let's talk specifically about that for a moment, because it
Yeah.
might be, severe depression, self-harm, borderline, other mental health diagnoses, where there's probably a number of parents listening, where there's this watch of trying to keep them safe, making sure
Yeah.
they're okay. How do you, I guess, balance that dance of really checking in on your teenager while giving them quote-unquote space to live their
Yeah.
life? How did you find that with your daughter, that dance?
I think, well, a couple things. I learned a lot through her admission at Casa House, that inpatient program, and they
They're
really
wonderful.
emphasized like the trust piece being rebuilt
Right.
and honoring, like giving her opportunities to show as a young lady
Right.
that she can be left alone for longer and longer and longer. And then that helped kind of build the relationship or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
totally.
the foundational trust piece. So, but yeah, like there is that part when you've been through something so scary with your child, then you kind of do want to hover. But it was,
Yeah.
they taught me, when she can stay safe for 15 minutes, great. Then half an hour.
Yeah.
And it is just doing those check-ins.
Mhm.
Hey, what you doing? Okay. And that has kind of been our model since Casa House of like doing those kind of longer and longer stretches. But there's still always in the back of my mind that if it gets too quiet,
You're going to be lucky.
my nervous system gets nervous, like I get
Yeah.
activated. And I think the other thing, Joel, for me too, is that piece of like supervision or whatever is, I think what has happened for me raising her is that nothing is neutral. Like when a child, at least my experience as a mother, is when a child is in that like impulsive, dysregulated mode, she became like determined to find a way to either self-harm or make a suicidal attempt. And like things that we would think of as neutral, yarn,
Yeah.
for example, like she had really thick crochet yarn that became a weapon.
Right.
She tried to strangle herself, like something like that, or a pair of leggings. I dealt with that with her, where she was strangulating herself with leggings. Like, she pulled nails, like for hanging pictures.
Right.
She and self-harmed with
Right.
that. Like,
There's
so
a
like
lot.
nothing
There's-
is neutral. Like that's what gets hard.
It sounds
Exactly.
like communication is really important, and care, just knowing that you're there to support her, and probably through Cass and the journey the two of you have been on.
Yeah.
It's really just understanding where each other's at. I love you. I'm here to support you, and just being on the same page as that sounds really powerful. I know in the next segment we're really looking forward to just talking about the impact of
Yeah.
how it's had on your family and just how things are journeying through that as well. But I think what you're talking about there, Wendy, is so key for any parent, to take home
That's right.
in communication and care. I care, I love you, I'm here for you, and also because of that, maybe I'll just be checking in on you.
Right.
Maybe I'll
Exactly.
just be
Showing
saying
I
bye,
care.
or maybe
Yeah.
I'll just be here. It's
Yeah.
not to annoy you, and even as a psychologist, I say this to some of my teenage clients and the parents too.
Yeah.
Parents are not here to annoy you or bother you. They just love you, and as your psychologist or as your parents, we're here as a team to support and journey with you. And I think that's an important takeaway. It looks different for every family. It also looks different for every child with their mental health diagnosis. But that communication piece that you're sharing, Wendy, is so powerful. So I just love the wisdom and journey that you've been on. And I know in the next segment we'll talk too about what you've learned from that journey and looking back, the advice you can give parents too. So thanks again for joining us and all the wisdom you shared.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, so I guess we're back at the next segment, and we just wanted to continue with some of that conversation of like having that high alertness and being like that vigilant at home and trying to keep her safe and secure and stuff.
Yeah.
And then letting her to go off to school. Like, what are some things that you kind of put in place with her, and having that open communication and always being that supportive parent.
I think as she when she returned from Casa House, she started back at at her high school here in Fort McMurray, and it was very much like the communication piece was, a check-in of how are you doing this morning, and actually her mental health therapist at the school and Naomi and myself created basically a checklist for Naomi, and the therapist really emphasized, Naomi, you'll do this with your mom right now because you're in grade 10, but this is something that we all need to do sometimes, is like, how am I doing today? Am I fit for work?
Tell us a bit more about this checklist. I think that's so good.
Yeah, so it was, and Naomi, it was cool too because the therapist had Naomi a part of what needs to be on the checklist. And so it was, did you get enough sleep? Did you eat breakfast? Those things that in the past we knew, if she went to school without breakfast,
Something's going to happen.
Yeah.
I was getting a phone call.
Yes.
So if I noticed she didn't eat breakfast, I would say, hey, I'm noticing you're leaving without breakfast. Is there something how are you doing? So eating enough. And outright asking on the checklist, are you having thoughts of self-harm today? I can think too, like, one thing for parents is to not be afraid of being direct.
I'm
Yeah.
so
I think
glad you're saying that.
for a lot of years, it felt really scary to say, are you suicidal in this moment? Are you able to stay safe? Ugh, I don't want to say that out loud because then that'll make it real.
I'm scared that I'm going to put that idea in
Make
their
it
head.
real.
But
But
that's
it's
not the
already
case.
there. And
Yeah.
so, like, in her wellness checklist of, like, communicating and supporting her, it was, are you feeling suicidal this morning? Are you feeling like you made self-harm? No. Okay, see you later. In that moment. But the thing
moment.
this week
Yeah,
has
that's
become,
right.
with our journey, this has become our mantra, is like, in this moment. In this moment, I am safe. The issue is, in this moment, I'm safe, but an hour later, I might be very dysregulated and unsafe. But the checklist definitely was a helpful piece.
And then did she have key individuals that she would go to?
Yeah.
Throughout the day,
Yes.
like at lunchtime, like I'm feeling.
Yes. And I think back on Melanie's definition and description of characteristics about the favorite person and what was the other word? Favorite person and like basically the black-white.
Yes, that's
Favorite
right.
person and enemy.
What was that? What was that wording I used? I'm trying to remember. Idealization and devaluation.
Yes.
So people were, you're like your person and just fixated in on that,
So
right?
she had that.
She had her person.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
she had those supports at
Good,
school
yeah.
too. Yeah.
And just a plug for schools, I think that's such an important thing.
Yeah.
We're only as strong as our supporting cast.
Yes.
It really takes a village to support any child.
Oh.
So,
Honestly, her school, like, through her journey, like, was consistently so supportive to both her and myself and my husband, and like just surrounded our family. Like, and I often would say to her mental health therapist at the school, oh my goodness, like, school is respite for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it is. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with saying that though, because it is
Yeah.
respite for everyone, not just someone who may be having some challenges with their mental health. It's a respite for all parents to bring their child to school and drop them off and know they're going to be safe.
Yes.
Yeah.
But knowing they're going to be safe, you were not sure even at school she would
Be safe.
No, and that was painful.
That would be painful.
That was
Yeah.
painful.
But just having that outlet of school, I was talking to one of my graduate students today about, planning and supports and things, and they're saying, is this too much to practically talk about, workplace or different things and supporting high school students? And, and for parents, supporting children with mental health, maybe your child's in school, but maybe they've even graduated. And I think just that support and structure, whether it be school or even volunteering or just something. I've worked with students who decided to drop out of school or graduated from school and just really struggle with their mental health because you walk away
From all
from
the
those structures and supports.
Exactly.
So it's like, how do you
Yes.
find those things, even if it's volunteering? So I think that's such a practical idea you're sharing, Wendy. The checklist of every day, just being real and talking about mental health, but also what structures and supports are outside of your home and immediacy that are going to help that person. Because anyone with mental health difficulties, we all need that structure.
Absolutely.
All of us as people, but how much more so?
routine and just knowing what to expect. We all want that in our everyday. So for Naomi, she needed it so much just for her everyday sense of security and stability. And you and your family needed to know that she was safe where she was going. And you can kind of go
Yes.
and breathe again
Yes.
instead of being in that constant hypervigilant state.
Well, it was almost like a shifting of supervision.
Yes.
It's like she might self-harm at school.
She might.
She often did.
Yeah.
But it was like I could do this a little bit, even though the phone call might come,
Yeah.
but like it was somebody else's
Mhm.
eyes on her and listening to her, holding her. Someone
Yeah.
else was holding her
So
for
good.
those few hours.
And together as a team, you're holding her.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So thinking about that supportive staff, is there any recommendations that you would give to teachers and
Oh.
students?
Yeah, I mean, just we know that mental health has, really, we've seen a decline in people's
Yes.
mental health, especially here in Fort McMurray with
Mm-hmm.
what our community has been through. So
That's right.
teachers are seeing way more kiddos
Yes.
struggling, I'm sure. I think specifically, when I was thinking about this, I think the idea that if teachers can validate, like that has been just like a superpower for me relating to Naomi, is the validation piece. And I think so often as teachers, you have a to-do list and you have tasks to accomplish.
So
And then
true.
you have this kid coming in who's not got their work done again and and I think if teachers can, it's hard, but take a breath and maybe look beyond the undone homework and validate maybe what's underneath. Like
Yeah.
validation is a big piece. And I would say too, like, recognize that they may be in your grade because of their age, but they may not be there emotionally or like
Mhm.
capacity wise.
That's great.
Like
Yeah.
I think about
Yes.
Naomi, like
Yes.
how many accommodations had to get made for her. Yes, she was in grade 10, 11, 12,
Right.
like sequentially or whatever,
Yeah.
like for her age.
Yeah.
But there had to be acknowledgement and things put in place to accommodate, where she just couldn't do the quote unquote normal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I think teachers are doing that
They are.
so often, but I think just expanding the lens of what might create
Yes.
undone homework or
Right.
disruption in class.
Because it's all about relationships, especially with any mental health
Totally.
concern. Relationships are the key.
Mhm.
Safety, security, and that if there's a rupture in a relationship, repairing it. We always talk about circle security. Wendy, you did circle security to help yourself out when in your parenting. And I know you've told me over the years that has helped you. And I know a lot of our teachers have some of the background in circle security, or they have counselors who are trained and do that work as well. These are all pieces. It's all relational, and every day it's the balance you got to do in your class. What needs to get done more? Checklist of the math homework, or repairing that relationship because the day before maybe the individual was struggling and had a blow up in class, right? So seeing the bigger picture of the relationship as the stabilizing force, not the curriculum.
Yeah.
That's a big piece of it, right? So
And it's not kind of rocket science in the sense where it might think, well, this is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But it's like meeting the child or meeting the person where they're at. It's
Yeah.
even shared before we got on Wendy about, a conversation you had with your daughter. Like, she was saying one thing and you wanted to give her certain perspectives and thoughts unfiltered sometimes. Right?
Yeah.
But really, as teachers, as parents, sometimes it's taking a step back and thinking, well, I might want to fix this problem, or I might want a
Right.
solution,
yeah,
or I might want an idea here, but how can I meet this individual where they're at and ask powerful questions to better
Yes.
understand them?
Yeah, the help me understand. Like, I remember someone saying, and maybe this could work for teachers and parents, is be curious, not furious.
Mhm.
Like,
Oh, I love that.
if that teacher could take a breath, because it's like you are furious, you didn't
You're
get your work
triggered.
done.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm just wondering what would be the barrier? What was the barrier?
Right.
Help me understand, like how that just it disarms us, if someone can approach us that way. So.
that's
just
really
be
great.
curious. Yeah, I
Be
like that.
curious, not furious.
It's like I know it, but do I know it? Because even with my own
Yes.
children,
Exactly.
it's like,
Oh.
oh my goodness, like
Oh,
seriously,
yeah.
I just need to take a step back and just ask those powerful questions.
Mhm.
And I think for all of us, supporting children or children as parents or as
Yeah.
teachers. That's just so I guess obvious or so practical, but just
In the moment, it's hard.
exactly. How do
It's
we
just
just create that space
Yeah.
and presence for ourselves
Mm,
to enter into their journey?
mm,
I just was wondering, and I want to pivot a little bit again. I'm using that word a lot. Sorry, I've probably said it 5 times already. Pivot 6 times. When Naomi watches this, because eventually she will,
mm.
do you think she will get any nuggets of this from a different perspective? And how do you think she'll respond to it? Because Naomi is living the life of a young woman
Mm.
who has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and some other things. You mentioned OCD, and we won't get too personal with what's going on in her life. But how do you think she has all the knowledge to help her understand everything she's going through? And will this help or will this hinder her?
Well, I want to say first that Naomi, as much as has this diagnosis, is far more than this diagnosis.
I'm so glad you went there.
And she is this incredible blend of competency and
Yes.
capacity and like ideas woman, and then sometimes gets sabotaged, I would say, by the diagnosis. But she does, like, that's what's been hard too, is like in so many ways she's just this lovely, amazing person. And a lot of times parents with children who are diagnosed with borderline deal with a lot of things around, risk behavior that I haven't faced with Naomi around sexuality or drinking and, misuse, substance misuse and things like that. Like,
You're not dealing with that.
I'm not dealing with that. So
She's an incredible young lady, and she's come so far.
she has. And
Yeah.
so, like, I would say that is, like, I hope if she watches this, she realizes that she is so much more than her diagnoses.
Yes.
And that, sorry, Melanie, your question was related to, like, what would she see in this?
So I'm just wondering, how would she feel? Because she's an advocate for mental health. She does a lot of work within the community, and she's put out different social media posts talking about mental health. So would she look at this as something that would be a helpful tool within herself? Would she want to promote this herself and say, this is my story? Where do you think or would she feel more internalized going, part of the borderline piece? Would it feed something in her that may not be as healthy?
Yeah, I don't know how she'd feel. I think there is sort of a sense of, like, I say you are more than your diagnoses.
Right.
But I think Naomi still does struggle to not take it on as her identity and label. And so then it would be like, I think watching this for her, if she watches it, it would be like, Mom's moving in on my turf a little bit.
Can you tell us what that means? What do you mean? by that?
Almost like a jealousy, like that I'm getting, that this is, Mom, that's not your story, it's my story. Not maybe acknowledging or seeing the wider view that her actions have rippled through our whole family,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Totally.
And maybe
So-
this will help her?
Maybe.
That's such an important aspect too, because we all have a story in it. There's the
Yes.
story of your other daughter. There's the
Yes.
story of your
Right.
dad. There's your
Yeah.
story. We all have a story in a mental health
right.
journey, not just one individual.
Right.
So on that note, in terms of story, how would you say the other individuals in the story, maybe in your family or other parts, have experienced that as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, the household is heightened. I would say our household is heightened. And it is that feeling, like for other parents, Walking on Eggshells is a great book. But there's a reason that book got that title, because there is that feeling of like a minefield.
Yeah.
What's going to set her off? Like, where's the next kabumo going to come? So the household tends to be quite elevated, and I find like the story of our younger daughter is a grief too.
Yeah.
And grieving, she's 7 years younger than Naomi, so there's already a big gap. So they probably, honestly, even if Naomi wasn't diagnosed, there would be a sort of sense of separateness.
Yeah.
But I think it's amplified with the diagnosis, and even this last month, it's, I miss Naomi. When is Naomi coming home? Like, and certainly like through Eliana's life, our younger daughter, she's 12 now, like half of her life, this has did kind of
Yeah.
overshadowed, like
Right.
Naomi's hospitalizations, Naomi's volatility. Eliana witnessed a very serious suicide attempt on behalf of Naomi one summer day. That is her
That's her
story.
story.
Yeah. Of grieving, again, grieving the sister she probably wishes she had,
Right.
but loving the sister that she does have,
That's
so
And missing her, because she's missing her.
she misses her.
And our audience may not know this because we talked about this prior, is because Naomi is not home right now. So Naomi is being stabilized right now in the hospital, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of her journey right now, is she needs some stabilization, whether that be medication adjustment or something to do that helps her feel more settled and safe.
Yeah.
And that's just part of the journey that you as a family, you have to navigate, where you're going to have these moments with her.
Yes.
But you're going to continue to grow and learn and be a family. You make jokes. I've seen videos where you're all dancing in your living room and having a good time. You're doing all the typical family things. So we're focusing in a lot about all of these mental health concerns, and as a parent, as a counselor, as a teacher. But at the end of the day, she's your baby girl. And you're going to do whatever you can to make sure she's okay and give her the best possible life that she can have. And you're doing a great job. You really are. And we see that as professionals. It's a lot to deal with. And what would you say, if there's one thing that you would say is your biggest takeaway? What would it be?
I think it was Christopher Robin to Pooh Bear, who said, "You are wiser than you know, or braver than you think, smarter than you know, and stronger than you believe." And
Love that.
yeah,
That's awesome.
I have learned so much through this journey, and it is because of Naomi's diagnosis that I went back to school.
That's amazing.
I mean, I would never have thought of myself as a master's student.
Yeah, and you were
But here I
so
am.
great at what you do, but it's also because of the journey you've
Yeah,
probably
it's
been on.
because of takeaways.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, there was more within my capacities than I ever thought was in there, and that it's that acceptance piece, radical acceptance of what is, and it's not that you like it or anything, but you say it is what it is, and then it's like such a release. And I remember
Let it go.
saying to you, Melanie, at one of our many meetings, that Stephen Colbert said about his father and I believe both brothers. There was a tragedy in his childhood where he lost his father and brothers tragically, and he said, "I love the thing I most wish had not happened." And
Wow.
and I remember saying to you, I
Yes.
don't know if I'm to love
Yeah,
the thing,
Yes.
but I accept the
Yeah.
thing I most wish hadn't happened. I do wish. It is a grief that
Of course.
for my daughter. It is a disability. It is an invisible disability.
Yeah.
If you looked at her on social media, you would never know she struggles the way she does. But
That's right.
but I accept, and I even see the gifts in amongst
She has many gifts
the
because of all of this,
Yeah.
right? So much of her personality has come out that I'm sure you're so proud of because of all of this, because she's become so strong in so many ways.
Yeah.
So it's not about you going through this alone with your family. She has lots of supports, and she's learned to reach out.
Mhm.
And that's another piece that maybe as we end this segment to talk about is when it gets too much, that's why there are walk-in clinics. That's why we have SOS and some other places in our community like CMHA that can help support parents, support children with some of these more complicated, heavy things. But at the end of the day, you're just a family just trying to get through, and you're doing a great job, and Naomi is going to figure it out, as we all do. Who has it figured out at 18, 19, 20?
Yeah.
No one. No one does, right?
Yeah. It's
So,
it's
perspective.
the unfolding.
Yeah,
right?
it's going to happen.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, on that side of things, in terms of that perspective being powerful, my wife and I were talking the other day, and we said, if you could go back in time, 10, 15 years, what would that look like?
Yeah.
And would you have any regrets? And I love what you're saying, and I think it's such an important perspective to have, that, life is not what we wish could have happened, but it's kind of living in the now. It's journeying in what is and really fully embracing that. But thinking about the time traveling, If you were to go back 10, 15 years to talk to your younger self,
Yes.
you know, as a parent supporting someone with even medical or mental health challenges, what advice would you give yourself?
I think I would just put my arm around my shoulder and say, you know what? Life is bittersweet.
Yeah.
Life is joy and sorrow. And quit with the idealistic sort of perfectionist vision of motherhood.
Yeah.
There's going to be joy, immense joy. In fact, Naomi's name means joy and delight. And she really is
Love it.
our joy and delight
She
in
is.
so many ways.
Absolutely, she is.
But they're there,
Yeah.
younger Wendy.
Yeah.
There is also sorrow in life too. And I think you have to be ready for both to
And it's okay.
exist. And it is
Yeah.
okay.
That's a great
Yeah.
perspective. And you think about like what you had wished at that time,
Mm.
and all of the stuff that you had grieved, like,
Yes.
and didn't expect anything positive. What's something that came out of it that was like a positive for you?
Well, my own learning, to be honest. I mean, and expanding my understanding and compassion for those living with mental illness. That's been a gift. And realizing like that purpose can come out of pain. Like
Right. Yeah.
we don't want pain,
Yeah.
but it's like that's where the growth often happens.
Yeah.
And it's definitely been true in my life. So I think
I like that quote. It makes you stronger. Right?
yeah. I remember I read somewhere, I heard somewhere about that purpose always out wrestles pain.
Right.
And I love that. Like it's like
Mm.
this has been agonizing. I remember Brené Brown said, something about like expanding our vocabulary for emotional literacy, and she talked about the word anguish. And I was walking on the treadmill and I literally started crying because I was like, yes!
It resonated
That's
with
the
you.
word. So there's
Full
been
body anguish.
anguish. There's been like fall to my knees anguish through this journey. But I choose to believe that purpose out wrestles the pain, the anguish, and that like my own growth, going back to school, that has been
Right. Yeah.
something really neat come out of this.
And your family has become so strong, and you have gone through so much together, and you may not have known what path you're going to be on, but one little pivot in your pivot, I said it again, one little thing that one little thing that you've done has changed you and put you on this path. But there's so many great things that have come out, and Naomi is an incredible young woman. Your other daughter is an going to be a young woman very soon. She is a teenager now.
She's a tweenager.
Tweenager. I was like
She's
preteen.
almost there.
right?
Yeah.
And she's probably going to learn a lot about compassion in life too from what she's seen. So there is pain, but there's also hope.
Yeah.
And maybe that'd be a great way to end this segment, is to recognize that reaching out for help is a very big piece of this. You're not doing this alone. And nothing is set. You just have to keep reaching out and working together and building your family. Just keep doing what you can to grow as a family and learn as a family. And every time you have something new that comes your way, you just negotiate and move on to the next step.
That's so good. I've heard it said that pain without purpose leads to hopelessness.
Oh, there we go.
But if you can find purpose in the process,
Yes.
there's something happening.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, to just share the amazing purpose in your daughter's life, in your life, Wendy. It's just so exciting to just sit down with you. Of course, it's challenging. There's this, I'll give a shout out here, a country music fan, I guess, but Alberta guy, Paul Brandt, he wrote this song called Bittersweet. And I love listening to it. The lyrics, it kills you, it breaks you. It's living and dying, laughing and crying, finding the beauty between. And I think that's really the purpose part, finding the beauty in everyday life. Not to get too sentimental, but there's something
But
called
you're right.
collateral
But
beauty.
that's surviving.
Right?
That's actually going to build your life.
Yeah,
It is.
and there is beauty in every day.
Yeah.
No matter what is kind of going on in our lives, no matter what's going on in our children's lives, there's a beauty, and even beauty from ashes. Sometimes the most challenging perspectives, the most difficult moments,
Yeah.
there's light coming at the end of the dark tunnels.
I'm going to quote a song now back at you. Andy Grammer I wish you pain. And
Okay.
every time your heart breaks, it grows a bit.
It
There's
does.
a line.
See?
It's about Andy. And I
That's
love
the
that song.
purpose.
Yeah.
You learn
And
from
the
it.
song is called I Wish You Pain.
Right.
Well, why would we wish our children pain or ourselves?
No,
But
we don't, but we learn from it and we
Yeah.
grow from it.
Yeah.
And it does make us who we are. It has made your daughter who she is and who you are. So
Mhm.
it is a journey.
Yes, yeah. I appreciate you coming to share. That was great.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
telling
you
Your
for having
story,
me.
it was, I know we could have talked about so many other things. We could have talked about specifics, incidents, but I think what we want our listeners to know is they're not alone.
Mhm.
You've
Mhm.
walked this path and you are still walking this path.
Mhm.
And even though your daughter is older, 19, 20,
Yeah, she's
19, it's something that will continue on and you're still learning from it. And parents can get that help as well. Teachers can learn more about it, read more about it. But by you giving us a little bit of an insight into your life, we are just so grateful for that because this gives us an idea of, from a therapist perspective, how to work with family, work with parents, work with children. So thank you for your time.
Oh,
And
Thank
also
you.
gives us hope, yeah.
thank
And
you.
gives us hope because
Your mental health
matters. Exactly.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you.